Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar and happy Liberation Day. So I'm Laura Telford. I'm the organic specialist for Manitoba government. And this webinar is part of a series on topics that we think that you'll be interested in. And you can find these on the Manitoba Agriculture YouTube channel, and there's actually an agri-food playlist in there. We are going to send you those links after this webinar. And I just want to make a couple of notes for you before we get into the session. This webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you need to run out partway through to check American news or whatever you need to do to get on with your day, just rest assured that you'll be able to catch it later with the recording. And I'm also going to send you some information that I have found really useful in my own journey towards understanding regenerative agriculture. There's some useful links if any of you out there are actually uh, interested in farming regeneratively, or if you're a buyer and you're looking to get into this sector, I can send you some links that will get you going. And I just want to start by thanking my colleagues who have been super supportive in setting this up. So first of all, Erin for setting up this webinar and dealing with all the technical stuff, and Luis and Kawasha who are organizing this series. So we don't have a chat for the webinar, but we do have a Q&A box. So as you're watching, and I know this is how my brain works, that questions are going to pop into your head as you listen to people. So please put them into the Q&A at that point, and Luis and I and Kawasha will monitor those questions, and we're hoping to leave some time at the end, and I may even consider um, posting some of those questions as we move through this webinar if they're particularly relevant. So before we get going with the content, I wanted to first do a land acknowledgement, and I'm freely admitting that I stole this acknowledgement from my friends at Manitoba Organics and the Prairie Organic Development Fund, both because I think it's really beautiful and also because I think it's appropriate for today's topic. So here we go. So we recognize that the people who are calling in are from many different indigenous lands, including unceded territories and recognized treaty lands. These lands continue to be home to diverse indigenous peoples whom we recognize as true land stewards and essential contributors to agricultural systems and to society at large. As caretakers of the land and the soil, we are reminded of our shared responsibility to respect and nurture these lands, recognizing that our work today builds on the traditions of those who come before us. So before we dive too deep and before I introduce you to our panelists, I wanted to just give you a little bit of some context setting. So recently, there's been huge interest from governments, from foundations, industry organizations, food buyers, and as well as from some farmers in either considering regenerative approaches or diving right in and doing regenerative practices on farm. And this is being driven by some serious modern problems that include climate change, declining soil health, loss of topsoil, loss of biodiversity, and a recognition that we have become a little bit dependent on fossil fuel inputs. So lots of farmers and lots of other people within our society are considering alternatives. And there are other alternatives that include organic agriculture, but there's recognition that whatever we do to solve these problems I've just described, we have to do it in a big way, and we have to scale up broadly and rapidly. So the whole point of today's conversation is to consider what it's going to take at the farmer level and at our institutional and societal levels to make sure that this happens in a big way. And keep in mind that we've done this in the past. You know, some of you are old enough to remember what life was like in the prairies before widespread adoption of no-till agriculture. So we massively scaled that up. And so what's it going to take to do the same thing with sustainable agriculture, of which I think regenerative ag is the one that's gaining the most attention these days. So there's lots of people that are jumping in. There's also some institutions that are studying the issue very carefully, and I'm going to send you links to these reports. One that's had an impact on me is one done by the Ivy School of Business. So you can't dismiss it because these are business gurus and not leftist wingnuts. And then there's another report done by the Food Water Wellness Foundation for Nature United. And that one was less focused on financial instruments that could basically cause us to scale up regen ag methods in a big way. It it looked instead at what are the barriers that Canadian farmers face in adopting regenerative agriculture methods. And their report was super useful to me, so I'm going to send a link to that to you. So this organization put all of these things into all of these barriers could be put into several large buckets that they termed economic, agronomic, social, cultural, and awareness barriers. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. So just before I hand off, I just want to say that there have been literally endless debates about what regenerative agriculture is and what it isn't. And one of the things that both the Ivy report and Food Water Wellness said was that the number one challenge to widespread adoption is really lack of universal definitions and standards for regenerative agriculture. And some people that I talk to, especially in Manitoba, say this is a feature and not a bug. That you cannot have really prescriptive standards in regenerative agriculture because everybody's farm is different. So the methods need to suit the farm's operation. And you'll hear a bit about that from our farmers today. But I can tell you that lack of standards has been hindering adoption because people want to know what it is that they're adopting before they adopt it, and whether it's going to make any money and whether it's going to make any sense on their farm. So those are the sorts of things we're going to talk about. So let's introduce our panelists. So first off, all of them are from Saskatchewan. Um, Allison and Cody are two farmers from the southwest part of the province. Allison is actually a native Newfie who grew up in Ontario and ended up pursuing education at the University of Saskatchewan, and that's where she encountered her partner, Cody Straza. So when they became a couple, they decided to purchase what is now an 8,000 acre farm near Wood Mountain, Saskatchewan in 2010. And I can tell you that this is one of the driest places to farm in the country. And they have been successful at doing that partly because of their use of organic and regenerative methods. They have been using all kinds of regenerative methods, such as reduced tillage, intercropping, crop livestock integration, cover cropping, pollinator strips and composting. They have been certified organic since they started farming, and they have been regenerative organic, which is a standard that we're going to be talking about. It is the quick way to name this standard is ROC. So they have been ROC certified since 2021. The other thing that's going to come up in this webinar is that Allison is the president of Canadian Organic Growers, which is one of, or maybe the only organic association to really adopt regenerative methods. And they are actively training farmers on how to use those methods. They have a program called Regenerative Organic Oats that is running and has a big waiting list in the Canadian Prairie. So Allison's going to tell you a bit more about that. Cody, her partner, actually grew up in the Wood Mountain area in Saskatchewan. He completed an engineering degree at USask in agricultural and bioresource engineering, and he followed this with a stint in manufacturing before he got back into farming. He is also part of Sask Soil, which is dedicated to improving the land and the environment for future generations. Cody and Allison I've known them for a number of years now, and one thing that's common about their trajectory is every year they seem to get a new award. And this has been happening since they started farming. So they're very good at it and have been recognized by most of the country's farm organizations as outstanding farmers, but also outstanding conservationists. Okay, the third person I want to introduce is Sean Catherwood. So Sean wears many hats. He's a fifth generation farmer from Saskatchewan, from Ceylon. His family has been farming there since 1905, and they've seen many changes over the years. And Sean says that the initial years were dominated by heavy tillage, not initial years, the first 80 of them, followed by a transition to no-till agriculture. More recently, as Sean has made his impact on the family farm felt, they are embarking on a new journey to incorporate regenerative practices and to improve farm resilience and sustainability. Sean also wears other hats, as I mentioned. He played a key role in helping PepsiCo to develop their regenerative agriculture program. They buy potatoes and canola and other products from the Canadian prairies, and they want to make sure that those products are grown sustainably. Sean is also a lead agronomist for the Canadian Prairies Trusted Advisor Partnership, which is a new soil health extension program which is designed for crop advisors in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. He also has his own company. He's the CEO of Spurline Crop Solution, which is a business for testing and retailing a line of eco-friendly crop inputs. So Sean has experience as a farmer, as a program designer, and as an extension specialist who works with both farmers and crop advisors. So that's a lot of experience. Last but not least, Jason Freeman. He has had a long and happy career in agriculture. He started off in Canada's big adventure trying to legalize industrial hemp production. He founded a company called BioHemp Environmental Technologies, which was the first North American company to market organic hemp foods. He sold this in the summer of 2002 and founded Farmer Direct Cooperative with 3 organic farmers that happened to provide hemp seed to BioHemp. Farmer Direct Co-op became the first brand in North America that was 100% farmer owned, 100% organic, and 100% domestic fair trade certified. under the co-op's third-party fair deal seal. So they developed their own fair deal certification. In 2021, Farmer Direct Organic became the first brand in the world to market regenerative organic certified oats, hemp hearts, and lentils. So remember that rock certification I told you about? Jason buys those rock products and provides a premium to his farmers. Okay, so now the moment that you have all been waiting for. Um, let's hand it over to our panelists. So, what I'm hoping to get from each of you is for Cody, Allison, Sean, and Jason to talk a little bit about what your primary occupation is and how it intersects with Regen Ag. And then maybe tell us a little bit about what led you to Regen Ag. So, Cody, I'm going to start with you, and then Allison, and then Sean and Jason.
Well, we're kind of intertwined. Our stories kind of goes together, but I don't know. Do you want to do a bit of an intro? Well, yeah, Laura kind of did most of it.
Yeah. So like, thank you, Laura, for that awesome introduction. My goodness. Yeah. So our primary occupation is obviously we're boots on the ground farmers. So we're a combination of small grains and livestock here on the farm, and a few other smatterings of things that we're interested in. But we actually, when we started farming, we were your typical organic system, which is still really great, but we soon saw with the drought that happened in 2017, we soon saw that we needed to make a bit more of a change. So Cody will kind of talk about the way that we transitioned into more regenerative practices.
Sure. Well, like Elsa said, we were a fairly traditional organic farm, fairly set 4-year crop rotation. We did one of those years was a green manure plowed out where we would grow a monocrop legume, usually yellow clover or forage peas, and then we would use a tandem disc to disc it into the soil, and then just continue the rotation. It was in the winter of 2015, I believe, 2015, 2016. I was talking with one of our neighbors, conventional neighbor, that we were talking about some of the intersections between organic and conventional. And he told me to go look up on YouTube a guy called Gabe Brown. So that night, I went, checked out Gabe Brown, and after a 1-hour video, I was hooked. I saw the practices, I saw the stacked enterprises, I saw the results, and I wanted that for our farm. So I was all in. I also wasn't quite as convinced. I think it took a video of Ray Archuleta and the rainfall simulator showing how tilled soils will run off the water and not infiltrate it. And that was what our plow down year looked like. That was our soils that were repelling water, not absorbing it. So we started off fairly simple, straightforward. Instead of growing a monocrop, we were growing about a 12 or 15 way cover crop blend. We parked the tandem disc and we started using a roller clipper. We started intercropping and companion cropping a year or two later. And then it was in 2018, we started custom grazing cattle. On our cover crop acres, we were doing the adaptive multi-paddock grazing, where we would use an electric fence to give the cattle just enough cover crop that they could eat half and trample half in one day. And then we would move them on to the next patch. So we were moving them every day, hauling water. It was a lot more labor intensive, but it really cut down on our expenses for equipment and labor, well, equipment and fuel, putting all of that cover crop into the soil. And we were getting dividends having that soil cover and cycling those nutrients through the cattle, through the rumen, right back onto the soil. Then in 2019, we had seen the advantage of the cattle, the custom grazing cattle that were on our land. We bought our own herd of cattle, and we've also been slowly expanding our land base. At that time, we took on a bunch of pasture, so now we're at where we are for land base. And then in 2021 was the first year we were able to become regenerative organic certified, or our ROC or ROC. And then I think it was with the next year, 22 or 23, we attained the silver level of ROC. And yeah, we've been working on that since. Did I say anything?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so who wants to go next? Sean?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Sean Cathard, and again, thanks Laura for the introduction. You basically, I think, answered these questions for us already. But so I always describe myself as a fifth generation farmer first. Laura did mention I do wear a lot of hats, but that is how I describe myself. And a relatively small grain farm, so no animal integration yet, but it's definitely part of our plans. And being a smaller farm, it's given me time to kind of explore other parts of the industry as well. So I've had a handful of jobs, um, right from, working for a chemical company out of school, just like everyone else does with an agronomy degree, to managing other farms and then working for PepsiCo. And now finally I get to work for myself. So that's pretty cool. And so on our farm, I would describe us as still in that transition phase into Regen Ag. We're about 3 years into doing it pretty full on. So definitely didn't quit cold turkey, the old conventional style, that's for sure. We've been kind of picking away at this as we can. I'll probably get into this a little bit more later, but a lot of dynamics and complexities come into making large shifts on a family farm when there's a lot of people involved, a lot of family members. Maybe they don't always see things the way I see it, so it's kind of working through some of that stuff. But yeah, we've started to adopt lots of intercropping of our cash crops like chickpeas and flax, mustard and peas. We've incorporated highly diverse cover crops like 15 species mix cocktails, which we sell as green feed, but also incorporate some grazing with our neighbors that do have cattle. And taken a lot of interest lately in adding perennials into rotation as well. So we've been picking away at how we can make that work, both for forage and for grain, which is kind of a fascinating topic for me personally. And yeah, part of the transition on our farm, we've kind of gone through two transitions, even in my short career so far. Because I was trained a real conventional agronomist. That's what I went to school for. Got my 4 year degree, and when I was in school, I started to kind of get this fire in my belly that something wasn't right in the industry. Because you can go at the U of S, I went a full 4 year degree, and I only took one class that had anything to do with soil biology. And I thought that was something was wrong with that. So then I started kind of getting interested about, like what's this Regen Ag thing you keep hearing about? And it's kind of cool to hear how impactful one man has been on this movement. That's Gabe Brown. I think we all, that was kind of our first initial entry point into hearing about what this Regen Ag thing is. So then, yeah, I kind of went down that path as well. But then what really drove it home for me was hearing other peer farmers in our province, like Cody and Allison. I remember listening to them lots on conferences when I was coming up through school and finishing school. Same with Derek Axton, who's basically a neighbor of mine. And the impact that hearing those stories from real farmers not that far away from you and how it's impacted their operation and their life was really what started driving this home for me and why I wanted to make this shift. Um, yeah, and then also my other occupation, I guess, off the farm right now, my business, Spurline Crop Solutions. Laura mentioned bit of a retailer for products, mostly like cover crop seed and stuff like that. But then I also am an agronomist as well, so we help with some of the consulting around how can you incorporate cover crops properly on your farm, other practices like different fertility practices and whatnot related to maybe more carbon-based inputs and stuff like that. So that's how I kind of focus my consulting. And then yeah, we help with kind of program opportunities for farmers. So we'll get into that later, but there's a whole bunch of programs that exist right now, both public and private sector. And we try to help support our clients and customers through what that all means, how they can take advantage of it without them getting taken advantage of, kind of thing, and just kind of help them work through that process. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So Jason, your background is a little bit different because you're not a farmer. So you've been buying organic grains for years. So why did you feel the need to start buying regenerative organic?
We we were actually approached by Whole Foods Market, who asked us if we were familiar with this new certification, Regenerative certified, and they asked us if we could come up with a few products for them, mainly oats and lentils, split red lentils and French green lentils for our private label for them. So 1 pound shelf packs under Whole Foods Market brand. So we went to our farmers and asked them if they would do it. We discussed what the premium would be and basically settled on roughly a 10% premium. Um, and there you go. We were open to the idea. Previously under Farmer Direct Co-op, we had um, done some innovation, I'd say, not necessarily on the agronomic side, but more on the social side. So, uh, for example, like social justice or rights for farm workers. Um, and so they were open to it. The Regen Organic Certified Standard's good. It's building off of certified organic. Um, all of our farmers are certified organic under core, and they didn't find it very difficult to get rock certification. Um, rock has 3 levels: gold, silver, and bronze. If you have livestock, you probably will get gold. Depending on what the auditor is saying that you need to do. But in general, farmers are asked to do maybe a few more green manure crops. And one thing I really like about rock is mandatory soil testing. So you can really see if your management practices are building soil organic matter. And I know, testing is a little fraught, from year to year it can vary, of course. But over time, if you're taking the soil sample from the same place on your farm every year, you know, over about 10 years, you should be able to get a pretty good um, idea of how your management practices if they're building soil organic matter. And, I've been an organic consumer since 1995, so it's always been on the marketing end. Um, I live on a small farm now. We do gardening, but it's not commercial production. Although we do manage the farm based on regenerative organic management practices. We don't use any chemicals, and we're starting to do a few other things too. Like I don't know if people are familiar with electro farming or electro gardening, which I think that's going to be really interesting because we don't really talk about the electrical charge of the soil, and that's extremely important for plant growth and the microbial life in the soil. And that comes down to really esoteric things like what type of implements are you using? Are you using iron, steel? Are you using copper alloys? They all do different things to the soil. So I think we're just at the beginning of this regenerative farming journey. We're going to start to learn a lot about it, and it's going to get better and better. And for farmers, as long as there's a market there, that's the thing, right? There needs to be a market for this, and the market's developing. But for farmers, it should be profitable. That's the whole thing about this. You're reducing your input costs, especially if you're conventional farming. You want to transition to this type of farming, and you're getting more for your crop. Um, and I would like to mention too that we have a lot of focus on reducing fossil fuel usage, which we all know is wrought with political considerations, and there's technological issues and all this stuff. Um, but we burn about 50 billion tons of CO2 equivalents every year. We've lost 2,500 billion tons of soil-borne carbon. So when you put 50 billion tons and 2,500 billion tons together, for me, the focus really needs to be on regenerative agriculture. And again, all the technology is here. Farmers, all the farmers across the world, if they want to switch or transition to a rock type of farming, could. Our farmers are doing great. They have excellent yields. There's no issues with that. And especially when, you have dry years or whatnot, the soil's retaining more moisture. So, kind of rambling on here, but, what you said at the start, Laura, is that, yeah, we need a wholesale shift to regenerative agriculture, and the technology exists. It's possible. We just need the political will in the markets to cooperate. And just one more thing about that is food quality. People are getting sick because they're eating too much processed foods. I think everyone knows that. It's pretty obvious. Um, so the market in a small way is really starting to focus on nutrient dense foods, basically foods growing through regenerative agriculture. This is the only way you're going to get nutrient dense food. You can't GMO it up. You can't add more chemicals. You have to focus on the soil and have really strong, diverse soil, and then you'll get that nutrient dense food, which we all need to heal ourselves. So we're slowly moving in that direction. Is it going to pick up steam? I think it is. Is it going to pick up enough steam? We'll see. It's a really interesting time in agriculture, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much, Jason, and everybody. So now we know who we're dealing with here on this panel. So now we're going to get into the tough questions. Um, so I want you all to think about and answer about whether you think that regenerative agriculture has the potential to be scaled in a meaningful way in Canada. And if yes, what are the things that this society needs to put in place to make this happen? Or is adoption of regenerative agriculture going to happen organically, i.e., independent of whatever moves that society makes? So I think let's start with Allison, and I'd like you to answer the question, but I'm also hoping that in the process of doing that, you can tell us a little bit, wearing your Canadian Organic Growers President hat, which is what needs to happen specifically on the farmer training side to scale up Regen Ag?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question. How do we scale these practices up? Thinking about that, I would ask then, are we looking at scaling number of acres? Are we looking at scaling number of producers? Because I feel like those are two really separate questions. It's regenerative ag is a lot more management intensive, like we can tell you that. And so scaling it across broad acres creates more of a management challenge and management time commitment as well, which is something that cannot be ignored. Thinking about this question too, I think we talked a lot about markets, which is super important, and we agree it definitely needs to be consumer driven, market driven. But I think there's also an aspect of it needing to be grassroots driven at the farmer level as well. Farmers need to want to make these changes themselves. We spoke about our way of transitioning, what propelled us to make the changes on our farm. It's a very personal thing, and you have to be committed to the changes, because the first few years are really, really difficult. We can't sugarcoat that enough. We decided to make our changes in the middle of an epic drought, which would not 0 out of 10 recommend, but I feel like if it's something that you can see the results, you have a network of people that you can draw on for resources and knowledge, then you have a better chance of being successful. And a really good program, like you mentioned, the Canadian Organic Growers has something called Regenerative Organic Oats program. And what it is at its roots is a peer learning program. So what we do is we facilitate the development of a peer network. And it's really interesting because these farmers come to us asking to join the program, and what they receive in return is a great network of fellow farmers, all usually within a similar growing region. And they also gain access to professional advice to help them along their journey, which I think is also a very key point. It's really difficult, and for farmers like us where we're at, to find independent agronomic advice for these types of practices. And so we do a lot of learning on our own. And what RU does is it matches the farmers with that professional advice right on right on their farm. So we facilitate having agronomists come to their farm, take the soil samples, look at the soil, explain what's happening, educate the farmer with the questions that they have to ask, right? So it's all farmer-led, farmer-driven, and it's been super, super successful. I know that my team at COG is going to be mad that I don't remember how many years we've been doing this, but it's been a lot of years. I think we might be on year 4 or 5 now. And every year we always have a waiting list of farmers that are willing, that want to join the program. So every year we only take a certain number of farmers so we can maintain the quality of the advice and everything that we're giving. So we're really hopeful that this type of mix of peer-to-peer learning with professional on the ground agronomic advice can be scaled out across Canada. We have plans to do that. Right now, Rue is based on an oats commodity, but we can scale that out to any particular commodity across Canada. So that's something that I think is really, really possible to be done. And I think we can use programs like Rue as templates across the country. And if, obviously ours is organic based because we're focused on organic growers, but you can scale this out in a conventional based program as well. As everyone else on the panel has alluded to, there's lots of resources available to do that. So it's just a matter of doing it in a way that farmers can find accessible and inclusive.
Cody, do you have anything to add to that about what you think it's going to take to scale this thing?
I think what Elsa said is fairly complete. It has to be drawn from both directions, from the consumer side and from the producer side. One of the challenges to overcome is what allowed no-till to become so widespread was that it simplified management very well. It simplified it a lot. And we have to reverse that because this is so much more management intense. And I think that's a big step to overcome, that it's difficult to scale that into a really large acreage system because of the complex management system that's required. So there has to be benefits on farm and financial incentives, I believe, that is, well, I'm sure we'll discuss this further on that aspect. But yeah, it has some challenges to overcome on the broad scale adoption.
And I think if I can piggyback on what you just said, one of the strengths of no-till adoption too is I think that it's one size fit all solution, right? Anyone can adopt no-till on their farm.
It's very prescriptive.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, for sure. But regenerative agriculture is not that way. It's very context dependent, right? So you can't, the things we do on our farm won't necessarily apply to my Rue farmers up who are primarily in northern Saskatchewan. Like we were exchanging pictures on the WhatsApp group last night. They're all under snow up there, whereas we have cedars going in our area already. So like it's really context dependent. And I think that is one of the main challenges in adopting this on a larger scale.
Okay. Jason, what are your 2 cents here?
Yeah, there's a lot going on here, obviously. One of the issues I think we're facing is legacy of industrial ag policy. So, for example, I see regenerative farming really taking off once more livestock is reintroduced back to the farm. Livestock and regenerative growing, I just think, is so crucial together. But for some reason, I've always scratched my head about this. If I'm a farmer in Saskatchewan, I can get my cattle slaughtered and packed at a provincial slaughter facility and sell that beef to, say, the Kaig in Saskatoon. But the second I try to sell that across provincial borders, all of a sudden I can't do it anymore because it wasn't slaughtered at a federal facility. So, we can get into conspiracy theories and, why there's, such what I think is idiotic policy. But its industrial policy needs to change. The government needs to create policy that provides farmers reasonable access to the marketplace and doesn't have these arbitrary roadblocks put up, which is essentially protecting, large industrial players. That needs to change. There needs to be the politicians and the bureaucracy needs to look at farming differently and take regenerative farming seriously and create policies that will facilitate that. So, that's one big thing. Another thing too is, we need more people to go back to the farm. If you just look at our society and see the levels of mental illness that's out there, chronic diseases, I believe part of it is, or most of it is because society went from basically, a farming society to an industrial society. And now we're seeing, all of the damage that that's produced. So for this to really take off, it has to be easier for people to farm. It has to be easier for people either own farms or, work on farms. Um, the economic infrastructure has to be there so farmers can hire people and pay them well without being stressed out about their farm's financial position. Um, are we getting there? It depends. A lot of people are having success starting small regenerative farms near large urban markets. Okay. But, what do we do out on the prairies? And so, there's a lot of economic and policy and cultural issues that need to change, which I feel that we're kind of at a breaking point as a society with a lot of these things. So, there's a possibility that they will change. The marketplace is definitely warming up to regenerative agriculture. Climate change mitigation seems to be a mainstream thing now. Are people connecting this to regenerative agriculture? Some people are. But truly, all of these issues get solved by regenerative agriculture. I like to call them cascade of positive effects from regenerative agriculture versus a cascade of negative effects from industrial agriculture. Um, so yeah, how quick will the shift be? It's a good question. I guess it depends how the forces of nature push us. Things get if nature force it pushes us, then I guess we go in that direction. So yeah, we need needs to be an intellectual framework that supports regenerative agriculture. Not quite seeing it yet. Doesn't mean that it can't happen, but we definitely need that.
Okay, Sean, what's it going to take to bring this to scale?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of build off what the three have already said because really excellent points. To be honest with you, I've actually been quite shocked at how quickly this has scaled in the last 5 years, call it. And maybe it's not necessarily actual physical scaling yet, but the scaling of that mindset shift that I've seen on the farm level. The interest level is really gaining traction, which is cool to see. But there's so many issues around actually adopting it that, again, these other panelists have already brought up, like how intensively you have to manage it. That's hard to scale up. And just the support from all levels of the industry isn't really there yet. And that's where the framework needs to come in, like Jason was talking about. And that is not there. So, how scaled can this be? Is it ever going to be as widespread as no-till as quickly? No, I don't think so. Would I like it to be? Of course, but I don't exactly know how we're going to get there. I don't know if there's so many different things you can talk about here, but I know what's fascinating to me is right now in agriculture, there's almost two movements happening side by side, and they couldn't be more different. One is this regen ag movement, and one is the scaling up of the industrial ag movement, the creation of these mega farms, taking advantage of prescriptive agronomy, no-till. We've almost created this beast that's so easy to farm across huge acres and grow a lot of yield. Not necessarily that it's quality yield, but it's yield that these farms have gotten so big and can manage it in this prescriptive model. And that's really taken off. So you got that side of the industry, and you've got this other side of the industry that we're talking about today. And again, they couldn't be more different. Now, in my mind, there's going to be a tipping point at some point of what's going to actually be sustainable long term to allow farms to survive financially. And Regen Ag is the model to do that. I really firmly believe that. And like we're always going through something. It seems like these days we got trade wars, commodity market issues, environmental issues, and when things really start hitting the fan, I think I would rather be in the camp where we've maybe hunkered down. Sure, we're not as scaled up because the management is more intensive, but we've built a resilient business and built resiliency in our land, and we can get through some of those hardships. Where some of these mega farms, whatever you want to call them, that are leveraged to the hills, when things start hitting the fan, I think they're in trouble personally. So longevity wise, I think that's what's going to help scale this regen ag movement up. Now that might just take time, and that's maybe the problem. But now again, in the short term, farmers that are interested in making this transition, because the interest is real, need more support. They need more support on the production side of it, like how you can actually adopt some of these practices agronomically. They need support from the other end of it, who they're selling their grain to. There needs to be market access for this stuff. The grain companies need to be bought in more. The retail level needs to be bought in more, and policy can help with all that. So that's a big huge issue is how can this ag system in Canada get behind this and help at all the different levels, because it is going to take a huge shift like that for this to really take off. And there's initiatives slowly starting to happen in the private sector to try and connect all the dots throughout the whole value chain, but it's just kind of getting started. So yeah.
Does anyone else want to add anything that was missed here?
I can add one thing. People are probably going to groan, but the whole thing of emission credits. For some reason, conventional farmers that still use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides got emission credits for zero-till farming, yet organic farmers didn't, even though they're actually building soil, which is, in my opinion, the best way to mitigate climate change. So there needs to be systems that reward organic or regenerative organic farmers, say beyond just what they get for their crop. And a little bit of that is happening. Apparently the federal government has a program where it's paying organic farmers to do plow down crops, which is interesting. Um, so infrastructure like that needs to come the organic community's way a little bit. If there's money that corporations and governments are giving out to offset their emissions, uh, it should really go to organic farmers, I feel. So that could help a little bit in the transition to regenerative farming.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Okay, so let's jump to that. So some of you have been talking about the role that policy can play here. So, what is the role of climate policies? For example, right now there are many different private schemes for climate offsets, as Jason just noted. We're also increasingly hearing about scope 3 emissions and carbon insets. So, at this point, I'd like to turn to Sean to talk about those different schemes. And there's a lot of different lingo that is used in this world. And I'm just wondering if you could explain it to us, what all this carbon offsets, carbon insets, scope 3 emissions, what does it all mean? And what's your own take on where we should go, Sean, with kind of climate policy as it pertains to regen ag?
Yeah, for sure. It's a loaded question. But yeah, so just on a high level, I do think that whatever you want to call it, climate policy or voluntary programs or involuntary programs, offset, inset, whatever, it definitely plays a part in this on the financial incentive side. And one thing that I always stress to farmers that we work with is I don't want you to make management changes just because these programs exist. You need to really buy in to your own mindset of why you want to do this, have your own goals, your own values of why you want to strive for this. Because if you don't actually believe it deep down in your heart that what you're doing is the right thing, and you're trying to just take advantage of a little extra money, dollars per acre, it's not going to work.
Sean, could you maybe just tell us to start with what is a carbon offset and what's a carbon inset?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, a carbon offset is where a farmer can, generate their carbon sequestration credit, they're that number per acre, and they can sell that credit off that land to a buyer. So it's literally like a commodity exchange market, essentially. So these buyers could be completely, well, they not could be, they always are other industries outside of agriculture that can buy into these credits to lower their environmental footprint on paper. It's basically a paper transaction. Now, physically, that carbon is still, in that soil and cycling through that soil in that system, but there's a paper trail of selling that to someone else to help their environmental footprint. So that's kind of an offset market. Inset market is companies within the same value chain, that can essentially exchange financial incentives or dollars in exchange for data. So again, that's like the PepsiCo model where I come from. I'll kind of talk on that because that's my experience. They're buying a commodity from Saskatchewan. We'll call it canola. And they are essentially paying the farmer for an exchange of data, and that's it. There's no exchange of a credit. The credit stays on that acre, stays with that farmer, and he's getting paid from PepsiCo and other people in the value chain, like the retail store, the grain company, the canola crush, all buy into this at the different stages. That incentive hits the farm gate, and in exchange, they get the data. So what they do with that data, so like practice data, some yield data, stuff like that, on that specific commodity, they throw that data into a model. That model then generates, an overall GHG equivalent number per metric ton of that commodity that was produced in that region or that supply shed region. And then, the PepsiCos of the world, the food company, they use that to generate their own internal reporting that they share with their shareholders and their other commitments they're a part of globally. And so the inset model really is just a transfer of that data and transparency of what's going on farm throughout the value chain, with no exchange of an actual credit. So personally, I'm a huge fan of the inset market versus the offset. It just makes more sense. Like the offset market is just a bunch of fluff, in my opinion. I know Western Canada has been trying to develop offset markets for what, 3 decades, and it hasn't really gotten anywhere too impactful. Whereas this carbon inset model is definitely a lot newer. Companies like General Mills and PepsiCo, kind of the first ones in the party here in Western Canada, and they've had a lot of success with it so far. And I know all other large food companies in the world, it's almost become the race, like who can get onto the farm gate quicker with the program. So this is just starting. In 10 years, every single food company is going to have their own region egg program, in my opinion, which then gets overwhelming for the farmers. They deal with all that and all this information coming at them, and why are they doing this? So yeah, it's a lot of movement with this right now. I'm excited about the inset market. I think the inset market has a lot of impact because it really plays on the pride that farmers have. Farmers are very prideful people. That can be for good and for bad at times. And when I talk to a client and we're helping them get enrolled in some sort of inset program, and you kind of explain the model, they actually get kind of excited about it. They're part of the story. They get to share their story about what they're doing on their farm and how they're growing food, or healthy food in their system versus maybe their neighbor or whatever else. They get to share that, and it transfers all the way through the value chain on that bag of chips or whatever it is in the grocery shelf. They can say that they played a part in that, and they get paid to do so. So again, it really plays to the traceability and transparency from kind of the farm to the table and all of that. Whereas the offset market is just kind of, okay, got my money, sign off my credit, and that's it. There's no story involved. Right now, the offset market, its only advantage over the inset market is they are delivering higher incentives per acre. So there's a little bit more money there right now. However, again, I just don't, longevity wise, I don't think the offset market has a chance against the inset market. When you get the big food companies of the world kind of getting together in a room and figuring out what it is they want to do with these different scheme rules for scope 3 emissions, and when they actually start coming down to the farm gate level rather quickly with real money. And these programs are quite easy to get enrolled into and get your money out of it. And when you compare it to government programs, it's a lot more seamless. They're more adaptable. They change things when they see it doesn't work. Whereas, with government, you get stuck in a in a cycle for 3, 4 years, and it's just got to be that way until we're in a new cycle, So, yeah, I don't know if that answered all those questions, but
Can I just summarize it to make sure that I've got it? So with the carbon offsets, farmers are basically selling data to buyers who are trying to meet their emissions targets. So it could be someone in another part of the world, or it could be an oil company in Alberta. And you're saying that the farmers may make more cash from that, but don't necessarily get a lot of pride from doing that. Whereas carbon insets are about forming a relationship with a grain company or another kind of a buyer. They're mostly grain companies right now. And so the farmer would benefit by having that relationship, and in some cases, some education and one-on-one benefits to being part of that program, and also maybe get a bit of a premium for their product. The buyer benefits because they can achieve their scope 3 emissions, which Sean mentioned, which are it's basically a policy word that means that buyers can gain some control over that which they otherwise could not control. So their ingredient suppliers, they obviously don't directly control them, but they can control how much water or energy they use within their processing facility. And the buyer also gets to talk up how great they are by doing regenerative agriculture and actually promoting it. So what you're saying is that that is more of a win-win than the offset market?
yeah, 100%. And I think too, like Jason brought a great point the last question. We're talking about how the whole framework needs to shift. And I think the inset model actually starts to help with that because every level from the farm to the grocery shelf is involved in it. They have room at the table. They can come and talk about what their goals are and why they're interested in this or not, and financially how much they want to commit to it. So you got the grain companies, the CPG companies, the crushers, retail, farmers, all kind of in the same room, getting to talk about how this can work. I think that's pretty powerful for actually making wide scale change versus, again, the offset market's just classic agriculture in Western Canada, export everything, right? That's exporter credits to a different industry. So I just don't see how that really benefits anyone, to be honest. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on then. So my next question is, how do we maintain consumer trust with all of these food businesses jumping on the bandwagon? And when I do research, I also see a lot of organic companies jumping on the regenerative bandwagon. And in some cases, these are companies that I know are not actively working with any regenerative farmers. They just say that they are buying from regenerative farmers. So in my mind, there's a fair bit of greenwashing that's happening in this space. So my question to you guys, and maybe let's talk to Jason. Are we eventually going to have to go the way of standards and regulations? Because I've been around long enough to know that in organic, we had to develop all of that to get past the greenwashing that was happening. What's your sense, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have a standard, have to be third party audited and certified. You have to have the accreditation bodies. It's building that infrastructure and for the consumer to trust something or at least anchor onto something like what is this? Okay, there's a standard here. There's a verification process, and it worked amazingly well for certified organics, and it is so far for regenerative organic certified. Um, when supply chains are so long, unfortunately, you need that type of infrastructure. If you're going down to the farmer's market every Saturday and you know your farmer and you talk to him and you have conversations about what's going on his farm, you don't necessarily need all the certifications. And the proof is in the pudding too. Regeneratively growing, organically growing vegetables, versus, the stuff that you get in the Walmart or whatever produce section. It tastes different. It's different. So, um, as supply chains get longer, you need those third-party certifications. The thing for me though is that once you set up those systems, is the industry protecting the integrity of those systems? And that's an issue that organics had with a lot of fraud that came into whether it's offshore or domestic fraud. Eventually, it looks like the industry responded to that, or the government did in the U.S. with the no-pick import permits, and more paperwork was just not so easy for a broker to, just waive, an organic certificate and import something, um, which we know clearly isn't organic. For example, glyphosate, um, drenched lentils from Turkey, right, which are flooded into the North American market as organic, and they're found out that they weren't. Um, it, the system was far too easy to corrupt. So, we need to move quicker as an industry to make the standard more robust to prevent this type of fraud. But essentially, yeah, this is what we need to do. We need to spell it out to consumers. There needs to be a standard that they can go to a website and check it out, and so they can have some trust. And I think Regenerative certification is doing that.
Okay, how about you, Sean? Do you think that standards and regulation are going to be inevitable in this space?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I don't think anyone's surprised by this. Like, it's actually kind of fascinating when we do talk with like a new client we're bringing on, help them find some program opportunities. Um, they bring it up to me. They're like, "Yeah, kind of, we understand that down the road, we're going to be kind of like forced into doing this stuff per se, for lack of a better word." And it's almost funny because more times than not, they seem kind of content with it, or not shocked by it, I guess would maybe be a better way of describing it. And so farmers are aware of what's coming, I think. And that's a good thing. Now we can start getting prepared. And I hope that this is more positive than negative that comes from things like, because you do need regulation to make this all work. Sometimes regulation can also be negative or be an inhibitor or restrictive at times, depending on how it's framed. So yeah, just kind of long story short, yeah, it's coming. It's coming quicker than people probably realize. Um, and to be honest with you, back to the other question again, quick, just to loop it in with the offsets and farmers selling off credits off their land, how will that be an implication for them when policy and regulation does come down, like tax incentives or interest incentives through financial institutions, or even premium incentives with insurance, not just crop insurance, but liability insurance, all that kind of stuff. Um, how will selling off credits affect all that? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Maybe it's something where you kind of shoot yourself in the foot a little bit if you haven't established that credit. So the next year you kind of have to start over, build that up again, sequester that carbon again, and kind of rinse and repeat, right? So I just don't know the implications around that at this time, but it worries me a little bit with that model. But yeah,
Are you
it's going to
worried
be,
that we're going to lose farmers over this?
yeah, a little bit. Again, if it's something that doesn't make sense for them in the moment of that transition, you only have like kind of one shot to get this right, right? Or else they'll lose complete interest and move on, kind of thing. So I do think when this does come, it has to be done right. It has to be done carefully, um, or else we will lose some interest for sure from farmers, I would say. That's where the waters can get muddied a little bit, but also does need to happen. So it just needs to be done right.
Okay, Cody and Allison, you've obviously already made the choice to get rock certified. So what's your advice to other farmers about how they might feel about standards and getting certified?
Um, yeah, this is a really interesting discussion. I'm really involved in the organic standards process, actually. The organic standards right now is undergoing It's regular 5-year review. So for those who don't know, the organic standards actually just recently celebrated its 15-year anniversary of being in existence in terms of being regulated. So it's not actually a super old standard if you think about it. However, the history behind it is something that I don't think is really appreciated necessarily by the broader regen movement, in that it's all started again with the grassroots push, right? A dedicated group of passionate people who we are now grateful to because they did all of this work, all of this initial work to get the standards to where they are today. And so it's not an overnight solution, developing standards. It's also not a private industry solution either, right? One of the strengths of the organic standards is the fact that it's publicly owned, right? It's reviewed every 5 years. Anyone can submit petitions to the standards to make changes to they think will strengthen the standard. That's an open process, and a group of people. I'm part of this group that represent the entire sector. Then vote on these changes. So it's a very democratic and open process, which I think is one of its greatest strengths, right? And it's an ever evolving thing as well. It's not a stagnant set of standards that doesn't move at all. So I think all those things are really important considerations when you're thinking about a regen standard, because I think we can definitely agree that that's something that will be required for in the conventional regen world. First of all, you need to define what regen means. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning, but that's definitely something that I know some of the national organizations are pondering. We need some sort of at least baseline of what regenerative means so that everyone knows what they're talking about, like everyone agrees on what we're talking about. And I think organics can be used as a really fair example of how to scale this out and how to make it something that is attainable for everyone. So the organic standard is not just for grain farmers like us, it's for the entire sector. So where the standards incorporates bees, it incorporates, pork, poultry, grains, veggies, everything, right? So it's very much possible to develop a national regulated standard that's third-party verified that is applicable across many different contexts. We have a very, very good example already in existence. And I think if we're willing to do that type of work, then I think the regen movement has a really, really solid chance of being something that can stick around and be something that's really positive in the industry. But you need to do all of those different things to get there. And it's definitely a long-term project. It's not an overnight solution.
And we've been talking quite a bit about the regenerative organic standard. And I forget how many pages of requirements there are. And the very first line item is you start with being certified organic, and then it builds from there. Which, if you're not organic, you don't qualify for these standards. There's other regenerative standards as well. Another one is called Regenified. It's, again, Gabe Brown's very involved in that. We looked into it, and we would struggle to make it in the lowest tier. And then I think we're required to move up within 2 years. But we don't qualify because of the little bit of tillage we use. They accept chemical use, but not tillage. So it's a conventional regenerative system, but I don't disagree with it. It's a good framework for conventional farmers. And anytime that our conventional neighbors are reducing their pesticide use, reducing their disturbances, creating more diversity on their land, that's a win for the entire community. They don't have to be organic certified to make a positive difference in their farm. There's another one called integrity growing. John Kempf is involved in that one. And it's all about the analysis at the end. These are not really a practice-based, it's a results-based. And there's nothing stopping more and more and more certified processes or certifications from coming online, creating a label, creating a following. That means everything means something different. So I think eventually we're going to have to somehow consolidate all of these different systems into a regulated system. And that's way beyond my scope of vision even, but it's, I think, something that will have to happen.
Okay, thanks. Those are awesome answers.
Can I add
Uh,
something to that,
yep.
Laura? Um, it's what Allison to add to what Allison was saying. Yeah, there needs to be a lot of cooperation, tremendous amount of cooperation. And on the farm gate level, farmers need to cooperate more. There's just a question in the comment section about, well, what if I don't have manure? What do I do? And I look at this just an opportunity for farmers to cooperate with each other. Those with livestock need to work with their neighbors to rotationally graze on some of their neighbors' land, for example. And then that solves a bit of the manure issue for farmers that don't want to have livestock, and then provides a solution to farmers that have livestock but are looking for more pasture, for example. Farmers used to cooperate a tremendous amount on the prairies, as we know, right? Specifically through the pool system. Um, and then I don't know what happened. I think TV, basically. TV came around, and all of a sudden, neighbors didn't meet anymore. They didn't politically organize anymore along those lines, and that's really unfortunate. And I feel that farmers need to get back to that because ultimately, at the end of the day, um, it's the farming community which is going to, for lack of a better word, save itself. Farmers can wait till the urban politicians and consumers do whatever they're going to do, but ultimately, the politicians and consumers will follow the farmers when the farmers organize, as has happened in the past. So that's just really important. Anything that helps facilitate farmers organizing with each other is a positive thing, and it will quicken the transition to regenerative agriculture, I feel.
Okay, thanks. I have a million more questions, but because we've got a million questions in the Q&A, I'm just going to ask a few of those, and some of them are very relevant to our questions about standards. So let's start with Christelle's question. We aren't certified organic, but we've spent the last 3 years getting regenerative land to market certification through Holistic Management Canada. How do we know which certification is going to be the gold standard? Since it takes time and money, it would be good to know. So, Cody and Allison, do you want to take a shot at that one?
Well, I mean, if you're speaking about non-organic standards, which one's going to be the gold standard? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like Cody mentioned, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and we've looked into several of them. It just really calls for the need for one regulated standard, I would argue. And then you could focus all of your attentions and efforts on getting that particular standard. And also the movement behind it can focus all of its attentions and efforts on getting consumers to understand what it means and pay that price premium at the end of it.
And I would say any relevant standard will speak to the principles of regenerative agriculture. And if you follow those principles, you will be regenerative regardless of what certification system you are currently in. So if you started one that is promoting good regenerative principles, and that happens to be down the road discovered to be not the gold standard, you should be able to switch to whatever has been identified as the gold standard. And you've already been doing good standards or good practices for the last however many years that you've been doing this. So I don't think there's a huge risk in picking quote unquote the wrong one. I don't think there is a right or wrong as long as each of them are promoting good practices and the right principles.
Sean, you work with farmers in the prairie. Which system are most of them hopping into if they're getting a standard?
Yeah, to be honest with you, that's a little on my repertoire. None of the farmers we're working with are involved in any standard to date. So the answer is none.
Okay.
But there's one thing we get some questions around. It's like people just trying to understand what it is. And their biggest concern or question that always comes to me, which I don't really have an answer for, is there an actual premium tied to some of this stuff? I know we go through a lot of I know that's the goal, but is there actually a market now? Like, can you actually see that premium right now if you sign on to one of these? The other people in this room will be able to answer that better than I could, but that's the first thing they worry about when we're talking to farmers is, okay, we're going through all this work. It costs money to be a part of this stuff. Is there an actual return on that investment right now? Sure, that's maybe short-sighted, but I know that is definitely a block to people jumping on board. Is the kind of, I don't know if it's a risk because it is more of a long-term play, but it's definitely a deterrent at the moment. Now maybe there needs to be some rhetoric around fixing that. Maybe those premiums are more immediate. I don't know that, but and if so, then that needs to be communicated maybe better to the community of farmers that are interested in this stuff. So yeah, it's in my world right now, it's kind of the incentive programs are dominating the conversation more than these kind of maybe more niche markets or certifications that you can be a part of. So again, everything plays their part in helping scale this up, and this is a huge, probably more important piece to it than incentive programs. But right now, it's kind of the incentive programs have all the momentum, I guess, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
I have a
So Karen
comment.
Murchison, sorry.
Sorry, I have a comment on the
Sure.
premiums if you
Yep.
yeah, we led with premiums. So for example, when Whole Foods Market came to us looking for ROC crops, we negotiate price with them, telling them that, it was obviously going to be a premium for the farmers. They understood that. That's pretty easy scenario. You're dealing with very niche consumer, even though they're large, it's still very niche, and that's what they do, right? They introduce new programs. Farmers typically get a premium when they're selling into retailers like that. So, for example, we came out with 12 buck a bushel ROC gluten-free oats at a time when the regular price for the oats was anywhere between $6 to $8 a bushel. So that really incentivized farmers. They like that, obviously. It looked like we didn't pay that. We purchased the rolled oats from the manufacturer. MGM in Saskatoon is purchasing a lot of ROC oats. But it looks like that premium's held fairly well. It's anywhere between 11 and 12 bucks, which is about $1 to $2 a bushel, higher than regular organic, gluten-free, and organic. So that's good. There's a significant premium for ROC lentils. Again, these are relatively niche, right? So, the conventional farmer that's selling to PepsiCo, for example, canola, this doesn't necessarily apply, but I even think PepsiCo and these companies are going to have to come up with some sort of premium. Of course, the premium to incentivize conventional farmers is a lot less than the premium to incentivize organic farmers because of just the acres and the volume that we're dealing with. Um, but there definitely needs to be a premium. And then, there's a question from Christelle about they're doing regenerative land to market certification and through Holistic Management Canada. And so, what's the best certification or standard to do? If you're in that situation and read between the lines, you're producing livestock directly for market, maybe farmers market or whatnot. Um, how do you feel about that standard? Try to put yourself in the consumer's role. So put a consumer hat on saying, okay, this farm is going to produce livestock and beef to this standard. How do I feel about that? And if you feel really good about that and you can explain it, then that's good. It doesn't matter what standard you have. If you can really go down and explain the touch points of what you're doing on your farm for holistic livestock management and why that produces more ethical and healthier beef, it's all good. You can communicate that to the consumers at the farmers market, for example. And I'm an organic consumer, but if I meet a farmer that's raising livestock in that manner, I'll buy his beef. Organic consumers don't tend to necessarily be dogmatic about it, but they want to know like what is it? Like what are you doing on your farm? Okay, you're doing this, this, and that. Okay, that's great. I'll buy your product. So I wouldn't get too caught up about necessarily which standard, but more about, can you explain that standard to yourself, put your consumer hat on, and do you really feel that it is holistic or regenerative, or is it a greenwash? If you truly feel it's holistic or regenerative, I'd say go for it. Go with that.
Thanks, Jason. So Karen Murchison, who's the ED at Canadian Organic Growers, asks, are all these standards and their associated labeling and claims, are they just going to serve to confuse consumers? And I want to answer that before you guys weigh in. Because years ago, I sent out a survey to food processors in the organic sector because it is in particularly the organic companies that are quite famous for using the shrapnel approach with labels, which is if you've got a claim, throw it on your package. And so I asked him exactly what Karen is asking here. Is that just really going to further confuse the mess that we see at the supermarket? And the answer from the food processors was no. Consumers are sophisticated creatures and they can handle a lot of information on a food package. If you can fit it on there and you can feel justified about making the claim, then go for it. So what are your guys' thoughts on all that? Jason, you actually have packaged foods. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm guilty of what you just said there. We have a lot of seals and third-party certifications on our package, but I read one study that says most consumers can remember 1,000 corporate logos. So I this doesn't overwhelm consumers at all, and it has a lot to do with if they care, right? If consumers care, they will definitely dive into those labels. If consumers don't care, they just want the cheapest stuff for their family. Well, that's not the consumer you're marketing to. They're never going to care until maybe they have a health scare or something that wakes them up to this. Um, so, the more information, the better. Tell consumers what you're doing. If you have it third party certified, even better, right? That builds more trust. So I answered your question. No, consumers can absolutely handle it.
Okay, thanks. We've got a million questions here, and we're definitely not going to get through them. So I would like a commitment from the panelists to maybe help me answer some of the ones that we don't answer, and we'll send them out afterwards if you're okay with that. And I'm assuming that we have a log of these so we can keep track of them. So there's one here that I want to ask, and it's from Tula Telvia. Are there any provincial governments or federal governments that are getting behind regen ag in any meaningful way that will help with a widespread shift? Who wants to go for that one?
I can comment. Like I mentioned before, there needs to be policy analysis and changes in policy, which create arbitrary blocks for farmer access to markets. And, a really big one is livestock industry and livestock slaughter and packing. And this is, it's really topical now too, because, finally, the government, provincial premiers are talking about interprovincial trade barriers, and we need to get rid of those. And livestock slaughter and packing rules are a huge interprovincial trade barrier. We need to get rid of that. I do not understand how the regulations uh, you know, are healthy for Canadians or prevent, diseases and meat going across provincial borders. It's ridiculous, right? Provincial slaughter facilities are fantastic. We all eat beef from these facilities. They should be able to cross provincial borders for sale. You do that, and all of a sudden, you provide access to markets for farmers, and then regenerative agriculture. All of a sudden, it's economically feasible.
One thing I just want to add to that thought, Jason, you're not wrong, but keep in mind this isn't just an interprovincial trade barrier. Canada has to have federal rules in order to guarantee access to international markets.
Yeah, I know, and that's another wrinkle, right? They always like to throw things in there. I would like to see a task force look at, okay, if we change the internal rules in Canada, but we keep the external rules for export, you know, what does that look like? Can we get away with that? New Zealand's got an excellent system. small scale slaughter modernized, and they're exporting it all around the world. So again, right, a lot of it has to do with do we have the will to go through these processes, or we just or we don't, and we're just going to stick with the status quo.
Right.
You know, maybe Trump's tariffs are a wake up call to Canada. Hopefully they are.
And I just want to add, because I do work for a government, is both federal and provincial governments through SCAP have best management practices. So Sean, what's your take working with farmers on accessing those SCAP programs? Are they making a difference, or is it with window dressing?
Yeah, it's not just the SCAP too. Like obviously we got the off-cap fund, which is provincially delivered, but it's federal money. Whereas the SCAP's a combination of provincial and federal money. And so yeah, we deal with these two programs on a daily basis with our customers. And the SCAP one specifically, I think, is quite a bit more meaningful, because it's not just about, oh, you're doing a change of practice, sweet, here's some money. There's a lot more to it than that. There's actual hands-on support and aid for making some of these transitions. Whether it be some sort of winter watering site for your livestock or something like that to pick on a specific thing, or like a grazing plan around that as well. If a rancher has no idea where to start, well, they can actually access some support from people within that SCAP program, and it's their job to help, integrate some of these practices and work hand to hand with the farmer. So those are, I find, really meaningful, and the incentive levels are quite attractive. Like 50 to 85 to 90% rebate on some of these different expenses really starts to add up and help with that transition, get over that hump, so to speak, with some of this stuff. So a big fan of the SCAP, no doubt about it. Now the off-cap fund, that thing all stemmed from that the Liberal government's kind of first approach at reducing fertilizer use. Their goal by reducing emissions by 40% by 2050 or whatever it was, and then they threw millions and millions of dollars at it. Of course, it's still a positive to see funds come to the farm gate to help with transition, but sometimes I find with the off-cap program, it really tailors to the low-hanging fruit. And there's a lot of farmers taking advantage of those funds at a large scale for practices I myself wouldn't consider regenerative. Um, and kind of leaving out again those early adopters or those really innovative growers that are making a difference because they've been forced to financially or whatever it may be. And so that's yeah a bit of a disconnect there between those two programs, but still as a whole, it's obviously what we do on a daily basis. We try and find an actual legit fit for some of these program dollars with farmers that really truly deserve it. And I think, yeah, it's the scale of what these programs are trying to capture are a lot bigger than the scale of what Regen Ag actually is right now. And they do play a part in scaling that up, but there is millions and millions of dollars hitting acres that maybe probably shouldn't, if that makes sense. But that's my opinion on that.
Cody and Allison, are you accessing any government funds?
We don't like for the off calf. I was actually wanted to comment on this as well. That I believe it's a well-intentioned program, but there's a lot of challenges with it, like Sean was just talking about. And because we were early adopters of a lot of practices, we haven't qualified for a single bit of off calf funding.
Mhm.
Um, and it's incentivizing a change in practices. And I know there is an education component to it, but if it doesn't change mindsets, it's not going to change those practices in the long term. And especially if a producer gets funding, changes a practice for a year, and it doesn't have immediate positive results, it's not going to stick. He's going to go back to what has worked for the last 20 years. And there will be a real negative connotation on this. Well, I tried that cover crop once, it never worked, so cover crops in general don't work, will be the coffee shop talk for the next 5 years. So it's a very tricky situation, and I don't know if off calf is 100% nailing it on the head.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much. We're kind of at the end of the session, and I just have to say that I'm so glad that I invited the three of you, four of you, one, two, three, four of you to join me today because you've all been amazing, and I like that you all have different hats and different perspectives on this topic that have, I think, been useful to help us all understand what's going on. So the next step is for us, if Aaron, you could send me the questions and I'm gonna get help from the panelists to try and answer them because I feel really bad that we haven't made it through them all. But I think the fact that there were so many questions suggests that people are interested in this topic and that you guys were successful in stimulating some thoughts. So we're going to get those answered, and I'm going to send you those links that I promised because there's some great resources out there. So have a great day, everybody, and thanks to all of you who listened through an hour and a half webinar, which is longer than our usual format. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Laura. Thanks, everyone.
bye.